Good evening, chat. I hope everybody's having a wonderful Friday. Welcome to the first ASMR special. We're going to be having a very quiet, calm, very relaxing, and overall just enjoyable experience. We've got some soft music playing, and of course, you're more than welcome to participate in the cafe. All you have to do is press exclamation point play. Exclamation point join, and you too can participate in our lovely little cafe. So come on by, get yourself a nice drink, get you a snack, get you a comfortable blanket, and just enjoy. It would appear that we have Globey and Cosmic Rages in our lovely little cafe so far. And of course, we will be reading the combined works of Edgar Allan Poe. So, at any point, we might decide to relocate, such as if I wanted to move us over here to the fireplace. And of course, we have our little fire mouse who will be joining us. So, why don't we begin? In between stories, we'll be taking very short breaks, where if you want to relax, or go get yourself a snack, go to the restroom, or just generally take care of yourself, this is absolutely the time to do so. And with that, we're going to begin. We will start with one of his lesser-known stories, simply called The Gold Bug. Many years ago, I contracted an intimacy with a Mr. William Legrand. He was of an ancient Huguenot family and had once been wealthy, but a series of misfortunes had reduced him to want. To avoid the mortification consequent upon his disasters, he left New Orleans, the city of his forefathers, and took up his residence at Sullivan's Island near Charleston, South Carolina. This island is a very singular one. It consists of little else than the sea sand. It is about 3 miles long. Its breadth at no point exceeds a quarter of a mile. It is separated from the mainland by a scarcely perceptible creek, oozing its way through a wilderness of reeds and slime, a favorite resort of the marsh hen. The vegetation, as might be supposed, is scant, or at least dwarfish. No trees of any magnitude are to be seen. Near the western extremity, near Fort Mullery, stands, and where are some miserable frame buildings, tinted during summertime by the fugitives from Charleston dust and fever, may be found. Indeed, the bristly palmetto, but the whole island, with the exception of this western point, and a line of hard, white beach on the seacoast, is covered with a dense undergrowth of the sweet myrtle so much prized by the horticulturists of England. The shrub here often attains the height of 15 or 20 feet, and forms an almost imperceptible coppice, burthening the air with its fragrance. In the inmost recesses of this coppice, not far from the eastern or more remote end of the island, Legrand had built himself a small hut, which he occupied when I first, by mere accident, made his acquaintance. This soon ripened into friendship, for there was much in the recluse to excite interest in extreme. I find him well educated, with unusual powers of mind, but infected with misanthropy, and subject to perverse moods of alternate enthusiasm and melancholy. He had with him many books, but rarely employed them. His chief amusements were gunning and fishing, or sauntering along the beach and through the myrtles, in quest of shells or entomological specimens. His collection of the latter might have been envied by the Swammerdam. In these excursions he was usually accompanied by an old man named Jupiter, who had been manumitted before the reverses of the family, but who could be induced, neither by threat nor by promises, to abandon what he considered his right of attendance upon the footsteps of his young Master Will. It is not improbable that the relatives of Legrand, conceiving him to be somewhat unsettled in intellect, had contrived to instill this obscenity into Jupiter, with a view to the supervision and guardianship of the wanderer. The winters in the latitude of Sullivan's Island are seldom very severe, and in the fall of the year it is a rare event indeed when a fire is considered necessary. About the middle of October 18 something, there occurred, however, a day of remarkable chilliness. Just before sunset, I scrambled my way through the evergreens to the hut of my friend, whom I had not visited for several weeks, my residence being at that time in Charleston, a distance of 9 miles from the island, while the facilities of passage and repassage were very far behind those of the present day. Upon reaching the hut, I rapped, as was my custom, and getting no reply, sought for the key where I knew it was secreted, unlocked the door, and went inside. A fine fire was blazing upon the hearth. It was a novelty, and by no means an ungrateful one. I threw off an overcoat, took an armchair by the crackling logs, and waited patiently the arrival of my hosts. Soon after dark they arrived, and gave me a most cordial welcome. Jupiter, grinning from ear to ear, bustled about to prepare some marsh hens for supper. Legrand was in one of his fits, how else shall I term them, of enthusiasm. He had found an unknown bivalve, forming a new genus, and, more than this, he had hunted down and secured, with Jupiter's assistance, a Scarabaeus, which he believed to be totally new, but in respect to which he wished to have my opinion on the morrow. "And why not tonight?" I asked, rubbing my hands over the blaze, and wishing the whole tribe of Scarabaei at the devil. "Ah, if only I'd known you were here," said Legrand. "But it's so long since I saw you, and how could I foresee that you would pay me a visit this very night of all others? As I was coming home, I met Lieutenant G from the fort, and, very foolishly, I lent him the bug, so it will be impossible for you to see it until the morning. Stay here tonight, and I will send Jupe down for the sunrise. It's the loveliest thing in creation." "What? Sunrise? Nonsense, no. The bug. It is a brilliant gold color, about the size of a large hickory nut, with 2 jet black spots near one extremity of the back, and another somewhat longer at the other. The antennae are... Dey ain't no tin in him, Master Will, I keep telling you." Here interrupted Juniper. "The bug is a ghoul bug, solid, every bit of him, inside and out, septum wing. Never felt half so heavy a bug in my life." "Well, suppose it is, Jup," replied Legrand, somewhat more earnestly. "It seemed to me, and the case demanded. Is that any reason for you letting the birds burn? The color," here he turned to me, "is really almost enough to warrant Jupiter's idea. You never saw a more brilliant metallic luster than the scales emit, but of this you cannot judge until tomorrow. In the meantime, I can give you some idea of the shape." Saying this, he seated himself at a small table, at which there was a pen and ink, but no paper. He looked for some in a drawer, but found none. "Never mind," he said at length, "this will answer," and he drew from his waistcoat pocket a scrap of what I took to be very dirty foolscap, and made upon it a rough drawing with the pen. When he did this, I retained my seat by the fire, for I was still chilly. When the design was complete, he handed it to me without rising. As I received it, a loud growl was heard, succeeded by the scratching at the door. Jupiter opened it, and a large Newfoundland, belonging to Legrand, rushed in, leapt upon my shoulders, and loaded me with caresses, for I had shown him much attention during previous visits. When his gambols were over, I looked at the paper, and, to speak the truth, found myself not a little puzzled by what my friend had depicted. "Well," I said, after contemplating it for several minutes, This is a strange Scarabaeus, and I must confess, new to me. Never saw anything like it before, unless it was a skull or a death's head, which is more nearly resembles than anything else that has come under my observation. A death's head, echoed Legrand. Oh, yes. Well, it was something of that appearance upon paper, no doubt. The two upper black spots looked like eyes, eh? And the longer one at the bottom like a mouth. And the shape of the whole is oval. Perhaps, I said, but Legrand, I fear you are no artist. I must wait until I see the beetle myself, for if I am to form any idea of its personal appearance. Well, I don't know, he said, a little nettled. I draw terribly. Should do it at least. Have a good masters, and flatter myself that I am not quite a blockhead. But, my dear fellow, you are joking then, I said. This is a very passable skull. Indeed, I may say this is a very excellent skull, according to the vulgar notions about which such specimen of physiology, and your Scarabaeus must be queerest succubus in the world if it resembles it. Why, we must get up a very thrilling bit of superstition upon this hint. I promise you I'll call the bug Scarabaei caput hominis, or something of that kind. There are many similar titles in the natural histories. But where the antenna you spoke of? The antenna, said Legrand, who seemed to be getting unaccountably warm upon the subject. I am sure you must see the antenna. I made them as distinct as they are in the original insect, and I presume that is sufficient. Well, well, I said, perhaps you have. Still, I don't see them, and I handed him the paper without additional remark, not wishing to ruffle his temper. But I was much surprised at the turn of affairs had taken. His ill humor puzzled me, and, for the drawing of the beetle, there's positively no antenna visible, and the whole did bear a very close resemblance to the ordinary cuts of a death's head. He received the paper very peevishly, and was about to crumple it, apparently to throw it in the fire, when a casual glance at the design seemed suddenly to rivet his attention. In an instant his face grew violently red, in another as excessively pale. For some minutes he had continued to scrutinize the drawing minutely where he sat. At length he arose, took a candle from the table, and proceeded to seat himself upon a sea-chest in the furthest corner of the room. Here again he made an anxious examination of the paper, turning it in all directions. He said nothing, however, and his conduct greatly astonished me, yet I thought it prudent not to exacerbate the growing moodiness of his temper by any comment. Presently he took from his coat pocket a wallet, placed the paper carefully upon it, and deposited both in a writing desk, which he locked. He now grew more composed in his demeanor, but his original air of enthusiasm had quite disappeared. Yet he seemed not so much sulky as abstracted. As the evening wore away, he became more and more absorbed in reverie, of which no sallies of mine could arouse him. It had been my intention to pass the night as the hut, as I had frequently done before, but seeing my host in this mood, I deemed it proper to take leave. He did not press me to remain, but as I departed, he shook my hand with even more than his usual cordiality. It was about a month after this, and during the interval I had seen nothing of Legrand, when I received a visit at Charleston from his man Jupiter. I had never seen the good old boy look so dispirited, and I feared that some serious disaster had befallen my friend. Well, Jup, I said, what's the matter now? How is your master? Why, to speak the truth, master, is not so very well as it might be. Not well? I am truly sorry to hear it. What does he complain of? There, that's it. Him never complain of nothing, but him very sick and all that. Very sick, Jupiter. Why didn't you say so at once? Is he confined to bed? No, that he ain't. He ain't fine nowhere. That's just where the soul pinch. My mind has gone to very hell thinking about poor Master Will. Jupiter, I would like to understand what you are talking about. You say your master is sick. Hasn't he told you what ails him? My master ain't nothing worthwhile for her to get mad about with the master. Master will say nothing at all ain't the matter with him. But then what makes him go about looking this way and there, with his head down and his shoulders up, as white as a ghost, and then keep a siphon at all times. He keeps a what, Jupiter? Keeps a siphon with the figures on the slate. The queerest figures I've ever seen. Is getting to be skeetered, I tell you. Have for to keep me tight eye upon him for days. The other day gave me the slip for some up and was gone the whole of the blessed day. Had a big stick ready to cut for or give him deuced good beating when he come home. But he's such a fool that I hadn't had the heart at all. He looked so very poorly. What? Ah, yes. Upon the whole, I think you had better not be too severe with the poor fellow. Don't flog him, Jupiter. He can't very well stand it. But can you form no idea of what has occasioned his illness, or rather this change of conduct? Has anything unpleasant happened since I saw you? No, massa, they ain't been nothing unpleasant since then. It was for then I feared. It was the very day you were there. How? What do you mean? Why, massa, I mean the bug there now. The what? The bug. I'm very certain the master will been bit somewhere about the head with that gold bug. And what cause have you, Jupiter, for such a supposition? Cause enough, master, and mouth too. I never did see such a deuced bug. He kicked and he bit everything that come near him. Master Will called him fuss, but as for the let him go, get mighty quick. I tell you again, then was the time he must have got bit. I didn't like the look of the bug mouth myself, nohow. So I didn't take hold of him with my finger, but I catch him with a piece of paper that I found. I wrapped him up in the paper and stuffed a piece of it in his mouth. That's the way. And you think then that your master was really bitten by the beetle, and that the beetle might make him sick? I don't think nothing about it. I knows it. It make him dream about the gold so much. If it ain't causing him to hit by the gold bug, it's heard about them gold bugs for this. But how do you know he dreams of gold? How I know? Why, he keeps talking about his sleep. That's how I know. Well, Jup, perhaps you're right. What fortunate circumstance am I to attribute the honor of a visit from you today? What the matter, master? Did you bring me any message from Mr. Legrand? No, master, I bring this here epistle. And here Jupiter mentioned me a note, with this ran thus. My dear, why have I not seen you for so long a time? I hope you've not been so foolish as to take offense by my little buskery of mine, but no, that is improbable. Since I saw you, I've had a great cause for anxiety. I have something to tell you, yet scarcely know how to tell it, or whether I should tell it at all. I have not been quite well for some days past, and poor old Jupe annoys me, almost beyond endurance. But by his well-meant intentions, would you believe it, he prepared a huge stick the other day, with which to chastise me for giving him the slip, and spending the day solaced among the hills of the mainland. I verily believe that my ill looks alone saved me the flogging. I have made no addition to my cabinet since we met. If you can, in any way, make it convenient, come over with Jupiter. Do come. I wish to see you tonight, upon business of importance. I assure you that this is of the highest importance. Ever yours, William Legrand. There was something in the tone of this note which gave me great uneasiness. Its whole style differed materially from that of Legrand. What could he be dreaming of? What new crochet possessed his exhausted brain? What business of the highest importance could he possibly have to transact? Jupiter's account of him boded no good. I dreaded lest the continued pressure of misfortune had, at length, fairly unsettled the reason of my friend. Without a moment's hesitation, therefore, I prepared to accompany the man. Upon reaching the wharf, I noticed a scythe and 3 spades, all apparently new, lying in the bottom of the boat, of which we were to embark. What is the meaning of all this, Jup? I inquired. Him scythe, master, and spade. Very true, but what are they doing here? Him de scythe and de spade what Master Will insist upon my buying for him in the town, and the devil's own lot of money I to give for him. But what in the name of all that is mysterious is your Master Will going to do with the scythe and blade? That's more than I know, and devil make me if I don't believe it's more than he know too, but it's all 'cause of the bug. Finding that no satisfaction was to be obtained of Jupiter, whose whole intellect seemed to be absorbed by the bug, I stepped onto the boat and made sail. With a fair and strong breeze, we soon ran into the little cove of the northward of Fort Moultrie, and a walk of some 2 miles brought us to the hut. It was about 3 in the afternoon when we arrived. Legrand had been awaiting us in eager expectation. He grasped my hand with a nervous empressement, of which alarmed me and strengthened the suspicion that I already entertained. His countenance was pale even to the ghastliness. His deep-set eyes glared with unnatural luster. After some inquiries respecting his health, I asked him, not knowing what better to say, if he had yet obtained the scarabus from Lieutenant G. "Oh, yes," he replied, coloring violently. "I got him from this next morning. Nothing should tempt me to part with that scarabus. Did you know that Jupiter is quite right about it?" "In what way?" I asked, with a sad foreboding at heart. "In supposing it to be a bug of real gold." He said this with an air of profound seriousness, and I felt inexpressibly shocked. "This bug is to make my fortune," he continued with a triumphant smile, "to reinstate me in my family possessions. Is it any wonder, then, that I prize it? Since fortune has thought fit to bestow upon me, I had only to use it properly, and I shall arrive at the gold which is in the index. Jupiter, bring me that scarabus." "What, de bug, massa? I'd rather not go for trouble dat bug. You must get him for your own self." Hereupon Legrand arose, with a grave and stately air, and brought me the beetle from a glass case to which it was enclosed. It was a beautiful scarabus, and, at that time, unknown to naturalists. Of course, a great prize in the scientific point of view. There were 2 round black spots near one extremity of the back, and a long one near the other. The scales were exceedingly hard and glossy, with all the appearance of burnished gold. The weight of the insect was nearly remarkable, and taking all things into consideration, I could hardly blame Jupiter for his opinion respecting it. But what to make of Legrand's concordance with that opinion I could not for the life of me tell. "I sent for you," he said, in a grandiloquent tone, when I had completed my examination of the beetle. "I sent for you that you could counsel and assist in furthering the views of fate and the bug." "My dear Legrand," I cried, interrupting him, "you are certainly unwell, and had better use some little precautions. You shall go to bed, and I will remain with you a few days until you get over this. You are feverish and—" "Feel my pulse," he said. I felt it, and, to say the truth, found not the slightest indication of fever. "But you may be ill and yet no fever. Allow me this once to prescribe for you. In the first place, go to bed. In the next—" "You are mistaken," he interposed. "I am as well as I can expect to be under the excitement of which I suffer. If you really wish me well, you will relieve me this excitement." "And how is this to be done?" "Very easily. Jupiter and myself are going upon an expedition into the hills, upon the mainland, and in this expedition we shall need the aid of some person in whom we can confide. You're the only one we can trust. Whether we succeed or fail, the excitement which you now perceive in me will be equally allayed." "I am anxious to oblige you in any way," I replied, "but do you mean to say that this infernal beetle has any connection with your expedition into the hills?" "It has." "Then, Legrand, can I be party to no such absurd proceedings?" "I am sorry, very sorry, but we shall have to try it ourselves." "Try it by yourselves? The man is surely mad. But stay, how long do you propose to be absent?" "Probably all night. We shall start immediately, and be back, by all events, by sunrise." "And will you promise me, upon your honor, that when this freak of yours is over, and the bug business, good God, settled into your satisfaction, you will then return home and follow my advice implicitly as that of your physician?" "Yes, I promise. And now let us be off, for we have no time to lose." With a heavy heart I accompanied my friend. We started about 4 o'clock, Legrand, Jupiter, the dog, and myself. Jupiter had with him the scythe and spade, the whole of which he insisted upon carrying, more through fear, it seemed to me, of trusting either of the implements within reach of his master than from any excessive industry or complaisance. His demeanor was dogged in the extreme, and "dat deuced bug" was the sole words which escaped his lips during the journey. For my part, I had charge of a couple of dark lanterns, which Legrand contented himself with the scarabus which he carried attached to the end of a bit of whipcord, twirling it to and fro, with the air of a conjurer as he went. When I observed this last plain event of my friend's aberration of mind, I could scarcely refrain from tears. I thought it best, however, to humor his fancy, at least for the present, or until I could adopt some more energetic measures with the chance of success. In the meantime, I endeavored, but all in vain, to sound him in regards to the object of the expedition. Having succeeded in inducing me to accompany him, he seemed unwilling to hold conversation upon any topic of minor importance, and to all my questions vouchsafed no other reply than "We shall see." Thank you, Grease 105, for the head pats. I greatly appreciate it. We crossed the creek at the head of the island by means of a skiff, and, ascending the high ground on the shore of the mainland, proceeded in northwesterly direction through a tract of country excessively wild and desolate, where no trace of a human footstep was to be seen. Legrand led the way with decision, pausing only for an instant here and there to consult what appeared to be a certain landmark of his own contrivance upon a former occasion. In this manner we journeyed for about 2 hours, and the sun was just setting when we entered a region infinitely more dreary than any yet seen. It was a species of tableland near the summit of an almost inaccessible hill, densely wooded from base to pinnacle, and interspersed with huge crags that appeared to lie loosely upon the soil, and in many cases were prevented from precipitating themselves into the valley below merely by the support of the trees against which they reclined. Deep ravines in various directions gave an air of still sterner solemnity to the scene. The natural platform to which we had clambered was thickly overgrown with brambles, through which we discovered that it would have been impossible to force our way but for the scythe, and Jupiter, by direction of his master, proceeded to clear for us a path to the foot of an enormously tall tulip tree, which stood, with some 8 or 10 oaks, upon the level, and far surpassed them all, and all other trees which I had ever seen, in the beauty of its foliage and form, in the wide spread of its branches, and in the general majesty of its appearance. When we reached this tree, Legrand turned to Jupiter and asked him if he thought he could climb it. The old man seemed a little staggered by the question, and for some moments made no reply. At length he approached the trunk, walked slowly around it, and examined it with a minute attention. When he had completed his scrutiny, he merely said, "Yes, master, Jup climb any tree he ever seen in his life." "Then up with you as soon as possible, for it will be too dark to see what we are about." "How far must go up, master?" inquired Jupiter. "Get up to the main trunk first, and then I will tell you which way to go. And here, stop, take this beetle with you." "De bug, Master Will, de gold bug," cried the man, drawing back in dismay. "What for must tote de bug way up de tree? Damned if I do." "If you are afraid, Jup, the best a great big man like you to take hold of a harmless little dead beetle. Why, you can carry it up by this stream. But if you do not take it up with you in some way, I shall be under the necessity of breaking your head with the shovel." "What de matter now, master?" said Jup, evidently shamed into compliance. "I always want for to raise a fuss with this old man. It was only funnin' anyhow. Me feared de bug, but I cun for de bug." Here he took cautiously hold of the extreme end of the extreme, and, maintaining the insect as far from his own person as circumstances would permit, prepared to ascend the tree. Oh my. Yeah, interesting. I apologize, I have to find my place again. In youth, the tulip tree, or Lyrodinum tulipifernum, it would appear it's had time. Give it just a moment. It'll give me a moment to take a sip of my drink. Welcome back, everybody. I apologize for the ad break, of course. We will now continue. In youth, the tulip tree, or Liriodendron tulipifernum, the most magnificent of American foresters, had a trunk particularly smooth, and often rises to a great height without lateral branches. But, in its riper age, the bark becomes gnarled and uneven, while many short limbs make their appearance on the stem. Thus the difficulty of ascension, in the present case, lay more in semblance than in reality. Embracing the huge cylinder as closely as possible, with his arms and knees, seizing with his hands some projections, and resting his naked toes upon others, Jupiter, after one or two narrow escapes from falling, at length wiggled himself into the first great fork, and seemed to consider the whole business as virtually accomplished. The risk of the achievement was, in fact, now over, although the climb was some 60 or 70 feet from the ground. "Which way must go now, Master Will?" he said. "Keep up the largest branch, the one on this side," said Legrand. The man obeyed him promptly, and apparently with but little trouble ascended higher and higher, until no glimpse of his squat figure could be obtained through the dense foliage which enveloped it. Presently his voice was heard in a sort of halloo. "How much further I gotta go? How high are you?" asked Legrand. "Ever so far," replied the man. "You can see the sky through the top of the tree." "Never mind the sky, but attend to what I say. Look down the trunk and count the limbs below you on the side. How many limbs have you passed?" "1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And passed 5 big limbs, master, upon this side. They go 1 limb higher." In a few minutes the voice was heard again, announcing that the 7th limb was obtained. "Now, Jup," cried Legrand, evidently much excited, "I want you to work your way out upon that limb as far as you can. If you see anything strange, let me know." This time, what little doubt I might have entertained to my poor friend's insanity was put finally at rest. I had no alternative but to conclude him stricken with lunacy, and I had been seriously anxious about getting him home. While I was pondering upon what the best to be done, Jupiter's voice was heard again. "Most feared for the venture upon this limb very far. 'Tis a dead limb pretty much all the way." "Did you say it was a dead limb, Jupiter?" cried Legrand in a quavering voice. "Yes, master, him dead all as a doornail, all done up for certain, done departed this here life." "What in the name of heaven shall I do?" asked Legrand, seemingly in greatest distress. "Do," said I, glad of an opportunity to interpose a word. "Why, come home and go to bed. Come now, that's a fine fellow. It's getting late, and besides, you remember your promise." "Jupiter," cried he, without heeding me in the least, "do you hear me?" "Yes, Master Will, I hear you ever so plain." "Try the wood, then with your knife, and see if you think it very rotten." "Him rotten, master, sure enough," replied the man in a few moments, "but not so very rotten as mout be. Might venture out a little way upon the limb by myself, that's true." "By yourself? What do you mean?" "Why, I mean the bug. This a very heavy bug. Suppose I drop him down fust, and then the limb won't break with just the weight of one." "You infernal scoundrel!" cried Legrand, apparently much relieved. "What do you mean by telling me such nonsense as that? As sure as you drop that beetle, I'll break your neck. Look here, Jupiter, do you hear me?" "Yes, master. I hear you hollering at me." "Well, now listen. If you will venture out upon that limb as far as you think safe, and not let go of the beetle, I'll make you a present of a $1 as soon as you get down." "I'm gwine, Master Will. 'Deed I is," replied the man very promptly. "Most out of the end now." "Out to the end!" he here fairly screamed Legrand. "Do you say you're out of the very end of that limb? Soon to be the end, master. Oh, Lord of mercy, what's this here upon the tree?" "Well," cried Legrand, highly delighted, "what is it?" "Why, ain't nothing but a skull. Somebody been left him up in this tree, and the crows done gobbled every bit of the meat off." "A skull, you say? Very well. How is it fastened to the limb? What holds it on?" "Sure enough, master, I must look. But it's a very curious circumstance, upon my word. There's a great big nail in the skull, what fastens it to the tree." "Well now, Jupiter, what exactly, as I tell you, do you hear?" "Yes, master. Pay attention then. find the left eye of the skull. Oh, that's good. Why ain't no left eye at all? Curse your stupidity. Do you know your right hand from your left? Yes, I know that's master. Knows all about that. 'Tis in my left hand when I chop the wood wide. To be sure you are left-handed, and your left eye is on the same side as your left hand. And I suppose you can find the left eye of the skull, the place where the left eye has been. Have you found it? Here was a long pause. At length he asked, Is the left eye of the skull upon the same side as the hand, or the skull too? 'Cause the skull ain't got in it no hand at all. Never mind, I got the left eye now. Here the left eye, what else to do with it? Let the beetle drop through it, as far as the string will reach, but be careful and do not let go of the string. All that done, Master Will. My easy thing for to put the bug through the hole. Look out for him there below. During this colloquy, no portion of Jupiter's person could be seen, but the beetle, which he had suffered to descend, was now visible at the end of the string, and glistened like a globe of burnished gold in the last rays of the setting sun, some of which still faintly illuminated the eminence upon which we stood. The scarabaeus hung quite clear of any branches, and, if allowed to fall, would have fallen at our feet. Legrand immediately took the scythe, and cleared with it a circular space, 3 or 4 yards in diameter, just beneath the insect, and, having accomplished this, ordered Jupiter to let go of the string come down from the tree. Driving a peg with great nicety into the ground at the precise spot where the beetle fell, my friend now produced from his pocket a tape measure. Fastening one end of this at that point to the trunk of the tree which was nearest the peg, he unrolled it till it reached the peg, and hence further unrolled it, in the direction already established by the 2 points of the tree and the peg, for the distance of 50 feet, Jupiter clearing away the brambles with the scythe. At this spot, thus obtained, a second peg was driven, and about this, at a center, a rude circle, about 4 feet in diameter, described. Taking now a spade himself, and giving one to Jupiter and the one to me, Legrand begged us to set about digging as quickly as possible. To speak the truth, I had no special relish for such amusement at any time, and, at that particular moment, would most willingly have declined it, for the night was coming on, and I felt much fatigued with the exercise already taken. But I saw no mode of escape, and was fearful of disturbing my poor friend's equanimity by a refusal. Could I have depended indeed upon Jupiter's aid, I would have no hesitation in attempting to get the lunatic home by force, but I was too well assured of the old man's disposition to hope that he would assist me under any circumstances in a personal contest of this matter. I had no doubt that the latter had been infected with some kind of immeasurable southern superstition about money buried, and his fancy had received confirmation by the findings of the scarabaeus, or perhaps by Jupiter's obstinacy in maintaining it to be a bug of real gold. A mind disposed to lunacy would readily be led away by such superstitions, especially if chiming in with the favorite preconceived ideas. Then I called to mind the poor fellow's speech about the beetles being the index of his fortune. Upon the whole, I was sadly vexed and puzzled, but at length I concluded to make a virtue of necessity, to dig with a good will, and thus the sooner to convince the visionary, by ocular demonstration, of the fallacy of his opinions he entertained. The lanterns having been lit, we all fell to work with a zeal worthy of a more rational cause, and as the glare fell upon our persons and implements, I could not help thinking how picturesque a group we composed, and how strange and superstitious our labors must have appeared to any interloper who, by chance, must have stumbled upon our whereabouts. We dug very steadily for 2 hours. Little was said, and our chief embarrassment lay in the yelpings of the dog, who took exceeding interest in our proceedings. He at length became so ostentorious that we grew fearful of his giving the alarm to some stragglers in the vicinity, or rather this was the apprehension of Legrand. For myself, I should have rejoiced at any eruption which might have enabled me to get the wanderer home. The noise was, at length, very efficiently silenced by Jupiter, who, getting out of the hole with a dogged air of deliberation, tied the brute's mouth up with one of the suspenders, then returned with a grave chuckle at the task. When the time mentioned had expired, we had reached a depth of 5 feet, and yet no signs of any treasure became manifest. A general pause ensued, and I began to hope that the farce was at an end. Legrand, however, although evidently much disconcerted, wiped his brow thoughtfully and recommended. We had excavated the entire circle of 4 feet diameter. Now we slightly enlarged the limit, and went to the furthest edge of 2 feet, furthest depth of 2 feet. Still nothing appeared. The gold seeker, whom I sincerely pitied, at length clambered from the pit, with the bitterest disappointment imprinted upon every feature, and proceeded, slowly and reluctantly, to put on his coat, which he had thrown off at the beginnings of his labor. In the meantime I made no remark. Jupiter, at a signal from his master, began to gather up his tools. This done, and the dog having been unmuzzled, we turned in profound silence towards home. We had taken perhaps a dozen steps in this direction when, with a loud oath, Legrand strode up to Jupiter and seized him by the collar. The astonished man opened his eyes and mouth to the full extent, let fall the spade, and fell upon his knees. "You scoundrel!" said Legrand, hissing out the syllables from between his clenched teeth. "You infernal villain! I speak, I tell you! Answer me this instant without perseveration. Which is your left eye?" "Oh, my golly, Master Will, ain't dis here my left eye for certain?" roared the terrified Jupiter, placing his hand upon his right organ of vision, and holding it there with a desperate pertinacity, as if in immediate dread of his master's attempt at the gouge. "I thought so! I knew it! Hurrah!" vociferated Legrand, letting the man go, and executing a series of curvets and caracoles, much to the astonishment of his valet, who, rising from his knees, looked mutely from his master to myself, and then from myself to his master. "Come, we must go back." And the latter, "The game's not up yet." Then he again led the way to the tulip tree. "Jupiter," he said, when he reached his foot, "come here. Was the skull nailed to the limb with the face outward, or the face to the limb?" "The face was out, master, so that the crows could get the eyes good without any trouble." "Well then, was it this eye or that through which you dropped the beetle?" Here Legrand touched each of Jupiter's eyes. "'Twas this eye, master, the left eye, just you tell me." And here was his right eye that the man indicated. "That will do. We must try it again." Here, my friend, about whose madness I now saw, or fancied that I saw, certain indications of method, removed the peg, of which marked the spot where the beetle fell, to a spot about 3 inches to the westward of its former position. Taking now the tape measure from the nearest point of the trunk to the peg, as before, and continued the extension in a straight line to a distance of 50 feet. A spot was indicated, removed by several yards from the point by which we had been digging. Around the new position a circle, somewhat larger in the former instance, was now described, and we began set to work with the spade. I was dreadfully weary, but scarcely understanding what had occasioned the change in my thoughts, I felt no longer any great aversion for the labor imposed. I had become most unaccountably interested, nay, even excited. Perhaps there was something, amidst all the extravagant demeanor of Legrand, some air of forethought or of deliberation, which impressed me. I dug eagerly, and now and then caught myself looking, with something of a very much resembled expectation, for the fancied treasure, the vision of which had demented my unfortunate companions. At a point when the vagaries of such a thought most fully possessed me, and when we had been at work perhaps an hour and a half, we were again interrupted by a violent howling from the dog. His uneasiness, in the first instance, had been evident, but the result of playfulness or caprice, but he now assumed a bitter and serious tone. Upon Jupiter's eye, again attempting to muzzle him, he made furious resistance, and, leaping into the hole, tore up the mold frantically with his claws. In a few seconds he had uncovered a mass of human bones, forming 2 complete skeletons, intermingling with several buttons of metal, what appeared to be the dust of decayed woolen. One or two strokes of a spade upturned the blade of a large Spanish knife, and as we dug further, 3 or 4 loose pieces of gold and silver coin came to light. At sight of these, the joy of Jupiter could scarcely be restrained, but the countenance of his master wore an air of extreme disappointment. He urged us, however, to continue our exertions, and the words were hardly uttered when I stumbled and fell forward, having caught the toe of my boot in a large ring of iron that lay half buried in the loose earth. We now worked in earnest, and never did I pass 10 minutes of more intense excitement. During this interval we had fairly unearthed an oblong chest of wood, which, from its perfect preservation and wonderful hardness, had plainly been subject to some mineralizing process, perhaps that of the bichloride of mercury. This box was 3 feet and a half long, 3 feet broad, and 2.5 feet deep. It was firmly secured by bands of wrought iron, riveted, and formed a kind of open trellis work over the whole. On each side of the chest, near the top, were 3 rings of iron, 6 in all, by which a firm hold could be obtained by 6 persons. Our utmost united endeavors served only to disturb the offer very slightly in its bed. We at once saw the impossibility of removing so great a weight. Luckily, the sole fastening of the lid consisted of 2 sliding bolts. These we drew back, trembling and panting with anxiety. In an instant, a treasure of incalculable value lay gleaming before us. As the rays of the lanterns fell within the pit, there flashed upward a glow and a glare from a confused heap of gold and of jewels that absolutely dazzled our eyes. I shall not pretend to describe the feelings of which I gazed. Amazement was, of course, predominant. Legrand appeared exhausted with excitement, and spoke very few words. Jupiter's countenance wore, for some minutes, as deadly a pallor as it was possible. And in the nature of such things, for his visage to assume. He seemed stupefied, thunderstricken. Presently he fell upon his knees in the pit, and burying his arms up to the elbow in gold, let them there remain, as if enjoying the luxury of a bath. At length, with a deep sigh, he exclaimed, as if in soliloquy, "This all come of the gold bug, the purty gold bug, poor little gold bug, which I boosting to sabotage of some kind of style. Ain't you ashamed of yourself? Answer me that." It became necessary at last that I should arouse both master and valet to the expediency of removing the treasure. It was growing late, and it behooved us to make exertion, that we might get everything housed before daylight. It was difficult to say what should be done, and much time was spent in deliberation, so confused were the ideas of all. We finally lightened the box by removing 2/3 of its contents, when we were enabled, with some trouble, to raise it from the hole. The articles taken out were deposited among the brambles, and the dog left to guard them, with strict orders from Jupiter neither, upon any pretense, to stir from the spot, nor to open his mouth until our return. We then hurriedly made for home with the chest, reaching the hut in safety, but after excessive toil at 1 o'clock in the morning. Worn out as we were, it was not in human nature to do more immediately. We rested until 2 and had supper, starting for the hills immediately afterwards, armed with 3 stout stacks which, by good luck, were among the premises. A little before 4 we arrived at the pit, divided the remainder of the booty, as equally as might be, among us, and, leaving the holes unfilled, again set out for the hut, by which, for the second time, we deposited our gold burthens, just as the first faint streaks of dawn glimmered over the treetops in the east. We were now thoroughly broken down, but the intense excitement of the time denied us repose. After an unquieted slumber of 3 or 4 hours' duration, we arose, as if by preconcert, to make examination of our treasure. The chest had been filled to the brim, and we spent the whole day and the greater part of the next night in scrutiny of its contents. There had been nothing like order or arrangement. Everything had been heaped in promiscuously. Having assorted with care, we found ourselves possessed of even vaster wealth than we had first supposed. In coin there was rather more than $450,000, estimating the value of the pieces as accurately as we could by the tables of the period. There was not a particle of silver. All was gold of antique date and of great variety, French, Spanish, and German money, with a few English guinea and some counters, of which we had never seen specimens before. There were several very large and heavy coins, so worn that we could make nothing of their inscriptions. There was no American money. The value of the jewels we found more difficulty in estimating. There were diamonds, some of them exceedingly large and fine, 110 in all, and none of them small, 18 rubies of remarkable brilliance, 310 emeralds, all very beautiful, and 21 sapphires with an opal. These stones had all been broken from their settings and thrown loose in the chest. The settings themselves, which we picked out from among the other gold, appeared to have been beaten up with hammers as if to prevent identification. Besides all this, there was a vast quantity of solid gold ornaments, nearly 200 massive finger and earrings, rich chains, 30 of these, if I remember, 83 very large and heavy crucifixes, 5 gold censers of great value, a prodigious amount golden punch bowl, ornamented with richly chased vine leaves and Brocelian features, their 2 sword handles exquisitely embossed, and many other smaller articles which I cannot recollect. The weight of these valuables exceeded 350 pounds, and in that estimate I had not included 197 superb gold watches, 3 of the number being worth each $500, if one. Many of them were very old, and as timekeepers valueless, the works having suffered more or less from corrosion, but all were richly jeweled and in cases of great worth. We estimated the entire contents of the chest that night at $1.5 million, and upon the subsequent disposal of the trinkets and jewels, a few being retained for our own use, it was found that we had greatly undervalued the treasure. When at length we had concluded our examination, and the intense excitement of the time had in some measure subsided, Legrand, who saw that I was dying with impatience for a solution of this most extraordinary riddle, entered into a full detail of all the circumstances connected with it. "You remember," he said, "the night when I handed you the rough sketch I had made of the scarabus. You recollect also, and I became quite vexed at you for insisting that my drawings resembled a death's head. When you first made this assertion, I thought you were jesting, but afterward I called to mind the particular spot on the back of the insect, and admitted to myself that your remark had some little foundation in fact. Still, the sneer at my graphic powers irritated me, for I am considered a good artist, and therefore, when you handed me the scrap of parchment, I was about to crumple up and throw it angrily into the fire. The scrap of paper, you mean, said I. No, it had much of the appearance of paper. At first I supposed it to be as much, but when I came to draw upon it, I discovered it at once to be a piece of very thin parchment. It's quite dirty, you remember. Well, I was in the very act of crumpling it up. My gaze fell upon the sketch at which you had been looking, and you may imagine my astonishment when I perceived, in fact, the figure of a death's head just where it seemed to me I had made the drawing of the beetle. For a moment I was too amazed to think with accuracy. I knew that my design was very different in detail from this, although there was a certain similarity in general outline. Presently I took a candle and seated myself at the other end of the room, proceeded to scrutinize the parchment more closely. Upon turning it over, I saw my own sketch upon the reverse, just as I had made it. My first idea now was merely surprise at the mere remarkable similarity of the outline, at the singular coincidence involved in the fact that, unknown to me, there should have been a skull upon the other side of the parchment, immediately beneath my figure of the scarabus, and that this skull, not only in outline but in size, should so closely resemble my drawing. I say the singularity of this coincidence absolutely stupefied me for a time. This is the usual effect of such coincidences. The mind struggles to establish a connection, a sequence of cause and effect, and being unable to do so, suffers a species of temporary paralysis. But when I recovered from this stupor, there dawned upon me gradually a conviction which startled me even far more than the coincidence. I began distinctly, positively, to remember that there had been no drawings upon the parchment when I made my sketch of the Scarabaeus. I became perfectly certain of this, for I recollected turning up first one side and then the other, in search of the cleanest spot. Had the skull been then there, of course I would not have failed to notice it. Here was indeed a mystery which I felt impossible to explain, but even at the early moment there seemed to be glimmer faintly within the most remote and secret chambers of my intellect, a glowworm-like conception of that truth which last night's adventure brought to so magnificent a demonstration. I rose at once, and putting the parchment securely away, dismissed all further reflections until I should be alone. When you had gone, and when Jupiter was fast asleep, I betook myself to a more methodical investigation of the affair. In the place I considered the manner with which the parchment had come into my possession. The spot where we discovered the Scarabaeus was on the coast of the mainland, about a mile eastward of the inland, but a short distance above high water mark. Upon my taking hold of it, it gave me a sharp bite, which caused me to let it drop. Jupiter, in his accustomed caution, before seizing the insect, which had flown towards him, looked about him for a leaf, or something of that nature, by which to take hold of it. It was at this moment that his eyes, and mine also, fell upon the scrap of parchment, which had been supposed to be paper. It was lying half buried in the sand, a corner sticking up, near the spot where we had found it. I observed the remains of the hull of what appeared to have been a ship's longboat, the wreck seeming to have been there for a very great while, for the resemblance of the boat timbers could scarcely be traced. We're going to have another ad, so I'm going to take a short break while ads play and sip my drink. I do hope you're all enjoying this lovely story time. Okay, you guys should be back from ads. Before we continue, I think what we're going to do is we're going to finish this one story, and then I think I am going to have to stop. Not because I want to, but because I can actively feel my throat starting to hurt. I'm not used to speaking this long, and it's gonna take a little bit to get used to this. So, what we'll do is we will get to the end of this story, and we will then switch gears. I'm sorry to have to do this, but I feel like it's better that my throat doesn't give out. And what I will probably do is I will probably try to, at some point, work in additional stories using the ASMR format. Probably every Friday you can expect a 1 hour story from me, and then we can relax, unwind after a long, stressful work week, and then we can go into something different. If you're willing to entertain this, I would greatly appreciate it. Now, on with the story. Well, Jupiter picked up the parchment, wrapped the beetle in it, and gave it to me. Soon afterward, we turned to go home, and on the way, we met Lieutenant G. I showed him the insect, and he begged me to let him take it to the fort. Upon my consenting, he thrust it forthwith into his waistcoat pocket, without the parchment with which it had been wrapped, and which I continued to hold in my hand during his inspection. Perhaps he dreaded my changing my mind, and thought it best to make sure of the prize at once. You know how enthusiastic he is in all subjects connected with natural history. At the same time, without being conscious of it, I must have deposited the parchment in my own pocket. You remember that when I went to the table for the purpose of making a sketch of the beetle, I found no paper with where it was usually kept. I looked in the drawer and found none there. I searched my pockets, hoping to find an old letter, when my hand fell upon the parchment. I thus detailed the precise mode of which it had come into my possession, for the circumstances impressed me with peculiar force. No doubt you will think of me fanciful, but I had already established a kind of connection. I put together two links of a great chain. There was a boat laying upon the sea coast, and not far from the boat was a parchment, not a paper, with a skull depicted on it. You will, of course, ask where is the connection. I reply that the skull, or death's head, is the well-known emblem of the pirate. The flag at the death's head is hoisted in all engagements. I have said that the scrap was parchment and not paper. Parchment is durable, almost imperishable. Matters of little moment are rarely consigned to parchment, since for the mere ordinary purposes of drawing or writing, it is not nearly so well adapted as paper. This reflection suggests some meaning, some relevance in the death's head. I did not fail to observe also the form of the parchment. Although one of its corners had been by some accident destroyed, it could be seen that the original form was oblong. It was just such a slip indeed, as might have been chosen for memorandum, for a record of something to be long remembered and carefully preserved. But, I interposed, you say that the skull was not upon the parchment when you made the drawing of the beetle. How then do you trace any connection between the boat and the skull, since the latter, according to your own admission, must have been designed, God only knows how or by whom, at some period subsequent to your sketching the scarabus? Ah, hereupon returns the whole mystery. Although the secret at this point I have comparatively little difficulty in solving. My steps were sure, and could afford but a single result. I reasoned, for example, thus. When I drew the scarabus, there was no skull apparent upon the parchment. When I had completed the drawing and gave it to you, and you observed you narrowly until you returned it, you, therefore, did not design the skull, and no one else was present to do it. It was not done by human agency, and nevertheless it was done. At this stage of my reflections I endeavored to remember, and did remember, with entire distinctness, every incident which occurred about the period in question. The weather was chilly, oh, rare and happy accident, and a fire was blazing upon the hearth. I was heated with excitement and sat near the table. You, however, had drawn a chair close to the chimney. Just as I placed the parchment in your hand, and as you were in the fact of inspecting it, wolf, the Newfoundland, entered and leapt upon your shoulders. With your left hand you caressed him and kept him off, while your right, holding the parchment, was permitted to fall listlessly between your knees and in close proximity to the fire. At one moment I thought the blaze had caught it, and was about to caution you, but before I could speak you had withdrawn it, and was engaged in its examination. When I considered all these particulars, I doubted not for a moment the heat had been the agent to bring it to light, upon the parchment, the skull which I designed upon it. You will very well aware that the chemical preparations exist, and have existed for some time out of mind, by means of which it is possible to write upon either paper or vellum, so that the characters shall become visible only when subject to the action of the fire. Zephyr, digested in aqua regia, and diluted with 4 times its weight in water, is sometimes employed. A green tint results. The regulus of cobalt, dissolved in spirit of nitre, gives a red. These colors disappear at longer or shorter intervals after the material written upon cools, but again becomes apparent upon the reapplication of heat. I now scrutinized the death's head with care. Its outer edges, the edges of the drawing nearest the edge of the vellum, were far more distinct than the others. It was clear that the action of the caloric had been imperfect or unequal. I immediately kindled a fire and subjected every portion of the parchment to a glowing heat. At first, the only effect was the strengthening of the faint outline of the skull, but upon preserving of the experiment, there became visible at the corner of the slip, diagonally opposed to the spot which the death's head was delineated, the figure of what I at first supposed to be a goat. Closer scrutiny, however, satisfied me that it was intended for a kid. "Ha ha," said I. "To be sure I have no right to laugh at you. $1,500,000 of money is too serious a matter for mirth, but you are not about to establish a third link in your chain. You will not find any special connection between your pirates and a goat. Pirates, you know, have nothing to do with goats. They appertain of the farming interest. But I have said just that the figure was not that of a goat. Well, a kid, then. Pretty much the same thing. Pretty much, but not altogether," said Legrand. "You may have heard of one Captain Kidd." I at once looked upon the figure of the animal as a kind of pun or hieroglyphical signature. I say signature because its position upon the vellum suggested this idea. The death's head at the corner diagonally opposite, and, in the same manner, the air of a stamp, or seal, but I was sorely put out by the absence of all else, of a body to my imagined instrument, of the text for my context. "I presume you to expect to find a letter between the stamp and the signature." "Something of that kind. The fact is, I find it irresistibly impressed with the presentiment of some vast good fortune impending. I can scarce say why. Perhaps, after all, it was rather a desire than an actual belief. But do you know that Jupiter's silly words about a bug being of solid gold had a remarkable effect upon my fancy? And then the series of accidents and coincidences, they were so very extraordinary. Do you observe how mere an accident it was that these events should have occurred upon the sole day of the year in which it has been, or may be sufficiently cool for fire, and that without the fire, or without the intervention of the dog at that precise moment in which he appeared, I should never have become aware of the death's head, and so never the possessor of the treasure? But proceed. I am all impatient." "Well, you have heard, of course, of the many stories current, the 1,000 vague rumors floating about money buried somewhere upon the Atlantic coast by Kidd and his associates. These rumors must have been some foundation of fact, and the rumors have existed so long and so continuous could have resulted, it appeared to me, only from the circumstance of the buried treasure still remaining entombed. Had Kidd concealed his plunder for a time and afterwards reclaimed it, the rumors would scarcely have reached it in their present unvarying form. You will observe that the stories told are all about money seekers, not about money finders. Had the pirate recovered this money, there the affair would have dropped. It seemed to me that some accident, say the loss of a memorandum indicating its locality, had deprived him of the means of recovering it, and that this accident had become known to his fellows, who might otherwise never have heard the treasure had been concealed at all, and who, busying themselves in vain, became unguided attempts to regain it, and given first birth and then universal currency to the reports which were now so common. Have you ever heard of any important treasure being unearthed along the coast?" "Never." but the kids' accumulations were immense, is well known. I took it for granted, therefore, that the earth still held them, and you will scarcely be surprised when I tell you that I felt a hope, nearly amounting to certainty, that the parchment so strangely found involved a lost record of the place of deposit. But how did you proceed? I held the vellum again to the fire, after increasing the heat, but nothing appeared. I now thought it possible that the coating of dirt might have something to do with the failure. So I carefully rinsed the parchment by pouring warm water over it, and having done this, I placed it in the tin pan with the skull downward, and put the pan upon a furnace of lighted charcoal. In a few minutes, the pan having come thoroughly heated, I removed the slip, and to my inexpressible joy, found it spotted in several places with what appeared to be figures arranged in lines. After I placed it in the pan and suffered it to remain another minute, upon taking it off, the whole was just as you see it now. Here, Legrand, having reheated the parchment, submitted it to my inspection. The following characters were loosely traced in a red tint between the death's head and the goat. I will not attempt to read this. But, I said, returning him the slip, I am as much in the dark as ever. Were all the jewels of Golconda awaiting me upon my solution of this enigma, I am quite certain that I should be unable to earn them. And yet, said Legrand, the solution is by no means so difficult, so you might be led to imagine from the first hasty inscription of the characters. These characters, as any one might readily guess, form a cipher. That is to say, they convey a meaning. But then, from what is known of Kidd, I would not suppose him capable of constructing any of the more abstruse cryptographs. I made up my mind at once that this was a simple species, such, however, as would appear to the crude intellect of a sailor absolutely insoluble without the key. And you really solved it? Readily. I have solved others of an abstruseness and thousands of times greater. Circumstances and a certain bias of mind have led me to retake interest in such riddles, and it may well be doubted whether human ingenuity can construct an enigma of the kind which human ingenuity may not, by proper application, resolve. In fact, having once established connected and legitimate characters, I scarcely gave a thought to the mere difficulty of developing their import. In the present case, indeed in all cases of secret writing, the first question regards the language of the cipher, for the principles of solution, so far especially as the more simple ciphers are concerned, depend upon and are varied by the genius of the particular idiom. In general, there is no alternative but experiment, directed by probabilities of every tongue known to him who attempts the solution, till the true one be obtained. But with the ciphers now before us, all difficulty was removed by the signature. The pun upon the word kid is appreciable in no other language than English. But for this consideration, I should have begun my attempts with the Spanish and French, as the tongues in which a secret of this kind would most naturally have been written by a pirate of the Spanish main. As it was, I assumed the cryptography to be English. You observe there are no divisions between the words. Had there been divisions, the task would have been comparatively easy. In such cases, I should have recommended with a collation of analysis of the shorter words, and, had a word of a single letter occurred, as is most likely, A or I, for example, I should have considered the solution as assured. But there being no division, my first step was to ascertain the predominant letters, as well as the least frequent. Counting all, I was able to construct a table. Now, in English, the letter which most frequently occurs is E. Afterwards, the succession remains as such: A, I, D, H, N, R, so on. E predominates so remarkably that an individual sentence of any length is rarely seen in which is not of the prevailing character. Here, then, we have, in the very beginning, the groundwork of something more than mere guess. The general use which may be made of the table is obvious, but in this particular cipher, we have only a very particular require its aid. As our predominant character is 8, we will commence by assuming it is the E of the natural alphabet. To vary the supposition, let us observe that the 8 is seen often in couples, for E is doubled with great frequency in English, and such words, for example, as meet, fleet, speed, seen, been, agreed, etc. In the in the present instance, we see it doubled no less than 5 times, although the cryptography is brief. Let us assume 8 then is E. Now, all words in language, the is the most usual. Let us see, therefore, whether they are not repetitions of any 3 characters in the same order of collation, the last of them being 8. If we discover repetitions of such language so arranged, they will most probably represent the word the. Upon inspection, we find no less than 7 such arrangements, the characters being 4, 8. We may, therefore, assume that represents T, 4 represents H, and 8 represents E. I unfortunately feel like part of the story is being lost because I cannot show you the characters of which are on the screen. I apologize. I'm going to skip to the forward portion after they have solved this particular mystery. We have, therefore, no less than 11 of the most important letters represented. It would be unnecessary to proceed with the details of the solution. I have said enough to convince you that ciphers of this nature are readily soluble, and to give you some insight into the rationale of their development. But be assured that a specimen before us appertains to a very simplest species of cryptograph. It now only remains to give you the full translation of the characters upon the parchment, as unriddled. A good glass in the bishop's hostel in the devil's seat, 41 degrees and 13 minutes northeast and by north, main branch 7 limb, east side shoot from the left eye of the death's head, a beeline from the tree through the shot, 50 feet out. But, I said, the enigma seems still in bad condition as ever. How is it possible to extort a meaning from all this jargon about devil's secrets, devil's head, and bishop's hostels? I confess, replied Legrand, that the matter still wears a serious aspect, when regarded with a casual glance. My first endeavor was to divide the sentence into the natural division intended by the cryptographist. You mean to punctuate it? Something of that kind. But how is it possible to effect this? I reflected that it had been a point with the writer to run his words together without division, so as to increase the difficulty of solution. Now, a not over-acute man, in pursuing such an object, would be nearly certain to overdo the matter. When, in the course of this composition, he arrived at a break in his subject, which would naturally require a pause or a point, he would be excessively apt to run his characters. At this place, more than usually close together, if you will observe the MS in the present instance, you will easily detect 5 such cases of unusual crowding, acting upon his hint. My voice is starting to go. I've got to stop this. I apologize. Give me one moment.